It's still the morning show here on the Rise News. It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edun, yesterday clarified that the federal government had no intention of illegally tapping into the 20 trillion naira pension funds for infrastructure development. The clarification followed media reports, quoting the minister saying, as at the last Federal Executive Council meeting, that the federal government was considering tapping into the pension funds to drive investment in growth areas, including infrastructure and housing. Edun had said the move to use the pension funds was part of the government's efforts to bridge Nigeria's estimated 20 million housing deficit and to provide massive housing and mortgage loans at 12% interest rate with 25-year repayment plans. The minister's comments immediately ignited serious reactions from notable Nigerians, including the former Vice President, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, who advised the federal government to suspend such a move. Atiku said the move was misguided and potentially disastrous for retired Nigerians who were dependent on their pensions.
It has come to my notice that there are stories making the rounds that the federal government plans to illegally access the hard-earned savings and pension contributions of workers. Nothing could be further from the truth. The pension industry, like most of the financial industry, is highly regulated. There are rules, there are limitations about what pension money can be invested in and what it cannot be invested in. The federal government has no intention whatsoever to go beyond those limits and go outside those bounds, which are there to safeguard the pensions of workers. Now, what was announced to the Federal Executive Council merely for noting, merely for information, no approval was sought for any action whatsoever, was that there was an ongoing initiative drawing in all the major stakeholders in the long-term savings industry, those that handle funds that are available over a long period, to see how within the rules, within the regulations and the laws, these funds could be used maximally, most effectively, to drive investment in key growth areas.
Well, Mr. Wale Edun there, Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, there to clear any doubts and to give clarity to the announcements that came out from the FEC meeting 2 days ago. Rufai, your take on the story.
Truth has to be said. Mr. Wale Edun should not try to be clever by half. He was the one that brought up the issue of pension funds when he was having a press briefing. And he was not clear on it. If you say, oh, it's just something you are thinking in the works, why did you bring it to the fore? Don't talk about it. Maybe when you have your clear laid out plan, you will. We know the law talks about 5%, but we don't even want. And I'm talking on behalf of myself as having my change, my tertiary change in my pension fund. I don't want the government to be able to dip its hand in my future, because the government have not shown good faith as regards how it spends money and resources. You can't pay ASU lecturers. You are going to do a coastal road that's supposed to be PPP, expended 1 trillion for 7.7 kilometers. You are quick to sign up the second phase of the coastal road. What's the rush about it? Because there are many other emergent needs. Let's look at the budget. This was the same government that was giving National Assembly money to be able to set up new library. For what? If they want materials for research and things, you can set up a new library for them, but you want to build a new structure, you want to build a hospital, giving all sorts of largesse. This was the same government that gave them money to buy SUVs. They were not even innocent or not on Nigeria-made SUVs. So this government has showed that it doesn't know how to spend money. So when you are talking about pension fund, people cringe. I'm happy for the clarity, but you were the one that brought up, and you did not specifically state that it was still something being thought of and it's in the work. So it's not that people just generate it. If you didn't say pension fund, we will not talk. You muted it first. And that's why Atiku Abubakar's letter was, hope you know that it's only 5%. Yeah, we know there's a 5% threshold for infrastructure. Come up with creative ways to be able to get finance. Yeah, you want to fund housing, you want to fund this. Bring private sector in. Those areas are areas that can be opened up for foreign direct investment. Why don't you come up with a creative way? But any money whatsoever, people just like to dip their hand. I'm sure in the past they've talked about unclaimed dividends too. I don't even know why I said that now, because as I said that now, maybe their eyes will go to that unclaimed dividends and say, let's go and look for that part. Think of things creatively, please.
All right, creative thinking.
Okay, the protest by organized labor and also former Vice President Atiku Abubakar over pension funds must be seen within the context of the experience of Nigerians with pension funds and the management of pension funds. Now, these pension funds are supposed to be retirement plans that will provide, succor for pensioners when they have retired from service. Now, all over the world, pension funds are invested, okay? Either in stocks, in bonds, in infrastructure, and all of that. And then the benefits accruing therefrom, is to the benefit of the pensioners themselves, because the pool of the funds is increased. Now, it's done in other places, but here in Nigeria, it's been a big problem. We first took the option of what is called defined benefits under the Pensions Act of 1990. When the Obasanjo administration came into office, they had the Pensions Reform Act of 2004. That Pensions Reform Act of 2004 was to introduce a contributory scheme that was not the defined benefits model that we operated differently. In 2014, there was another Pensions Reform Act. The new act, tried to provide a framework for both public sector and the private sector. But where does the problem lie? The problem has always been in the management. In 2015, 4 persons were taken to court for having misappropriated over 15 billion of pension funds. By 2021, there was the report by EFCC that in fact by 2021, within a space of about 6 years, that over 195 billion naira have been misappropriated as pension funds. And then, of course, you recall that by November 2021, persons were convicted and jailed for having misappropriated pension funds. In one particular case, 2.1 billion naira. So with that background, with that experience, anytime, organized labor or concerned citizens here, that there is an attempt to use pension funds to do anything, whether it's even for mortgage, whether it's for addressing housing deficit, Nigerians will be skeptical. And that was why Joe Ajero of the NLC was making the point about transparency and accountability. It's based on past experience. And that is why, again, Joe Ajero was saying that there is even no PENCOM board, that the PENCOM board has not been constituted. So who is going to do the oversight? How would the process that government is even proposing be managed? Then Joe Ajero made the point that there is no provision for what the government is proposing, infrastructure, in the Pensions Act. However, the truth of the matter is that there are regulations with regard to investments. There is a regulation with regard to investments, sections 8.0, section 8.1, and section 8.2 spell out the limit with which you can, use pension funds for infrastructure or for any other purpose. And that's the explanation, that's at the heart of the explanation by the Minister of Finance, Mr. Wale Edun, when he said, look, there are rules, extant rules, he used the word extant rules, and that government will be guided by extant rules. He also made the second point that, look, there will be consultation with stakeholders. Well, NSC is very strong on the issue of consultations because part of their protest with electricity hike and all of that is that, look, government just hiked electricity tariffs without consulting with the stakeholders. And there's something called the pension industry, and there are stakeholders there. So Mr. Wale Edun is saying, we will consult the stakeholders. But the bottom line here, whether it is Vice President Atiku Abubakar or it is the organized labor, NLC, TUC, protesting It is based on experience of how pensioners have been treated in this country. It's a response to how every effort in terms of reforms has also not helped to address the problems that emerge. And this is not just at the federal level. Only earlier this month in Niger State, the pensioners there were protesting that, look, the contributing pension scheme is not being managed well. So even at the state level, the situation is even worse. So what the federal government needs to do is first to make sure they consult the stakeholders, including the persons whose funds will be invested, and to make sure that they follow the rules. The clarification is not enough, but to carry, what is more important, is to carry, all the stakeholders within the pension industry forward. They're talking about mortgage, housing deficit, and all that. That is interesting. In a country where, at the state level, people's houses are being demolished, and yet we're talking about 20 million housing deficit. You see the many contradictions that we have to deal with at all levels in this country.
Well, yesterday, the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy thought it fit or deemed it fit to clarify a statement that was credited to him. And in fact, yesterday we did talk about that in detail on the show, to speak about the plans for the Nigerian government for our pensions, you and me. And what a number of people had come out to say, including organized labor, was that government shouldn't touch pensions. Of course, a lack of trust, perhaps even in the management of resources, or the lack of transparency, the corruption that has bedeviled that sector in the past, especially with regards to pension funds, would perhaps make you understand the reluctance of a number of people to want to accept for government to dip into pensions to fund certain, what is termed as certain critical infrastructure. Now, there are provisions for investment with regards to pension funds, and it's been highlighted a number of times. I believe everybody knows about this now. 10% on a very general level, whilst for a single issuer, the maximum of 5% investment of total pension funds. Currently, it's said to be just a little point under 20 trillion naira that is available to the government to use. Now, in terms of the rationale given for the need to dip into the pension funds is to fix the housing deficit that we currently have. And if you recall, this is part of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's mandate, his critical areas in terms of where he wants to address making housing affordable and accessible to as many Nigerians as possible. And the minister laid out the plans where we'll have a mortgage system, 12% interest, over 25 years in terms of repayment. And we see in many developed countries or developing countries where this has worked, where people are able to be homeowners as a result of provisions made for mortgage. If you look at the Nigerian system, we don't have that. We do have mortgage facilities, but it's not as solid or as accessible in terms of the terms of the mortgage or people applying to that to be able to, to access that, and also affordable housing as well. So in terms of the rationale given, you can understand that there's a need for that. We need infrastructural development, and in order for that to happen, we must have a lot of investment. The big question then is, where would this investment come? Right from the very beginning of this administration, there have been talks around a revenue crunch. The fact that we just don't have the money to do all these grand projects that were either promised during campaign season or that were announced at inauguration. Great, or some ideas for renewed hope, but unfortunately, no resource to meet those ideas. And a number of things have been given as solutions, or how to say. One of the key things that people have proposed is, first of all, cut the waste and spending of government. You're able to plug some, save and mop up some savings there in order to plug back into resource control. What it looks like in the past few days is that this government, in trying to find ways to get more revenue, have introduced new taxes, which has been revoked, which has been taken back. More the idea of touching pensions. And in the coming days, I do believe that there will be more announcements, because they are looking for money, simply put. And looking for money, like before you were saying, you were giving them a new idea this morning in terms of our unclaimed dividends. Some people I hope they won't touch it, but some people have even talked about. Remember, there was a time in the last administration where they talked about even accounts that had been dormant for a very long time. So at the foundation or the crux of this is a quest for revenue and the fact that, unfortunately, in the immediate, there are no creative ideas enough to have revenue to fund some of the big ideas of this particular administration. I can understand on one hand wanting to, do the big projects, but on the other hand, being strapped, cash strapped, not enough money. We're paying debt. We have issues of oil bunkering. We're not making enough money in that regard. There's no diversification of the economy. So if we're serious about shoring up revenue, then we must begin to critically address some of the fundamental challenges that have stopped Nigeria from earning the much needed forex and being able to attract investment. That is the real conversation to have, not the little, low-hanging fruits that would affect the people even further. Move on to our next story. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu yesterday hosted the new Senegalese president, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, and called for an alignment of purpose and structure in West Africa to effectively address the challenges confronting the region. Speaking during a meeting with Faye at the State House, the president said West Africa must work together to defeat the hydra-headed problems of terrorism, banditry, human trafficking, and poverty. He advised the leaders in the region to make the people the point of convergence in governance, noting that the essence of democracy was lost when the people were not the focal point. President Tinubu emphasized that democratic governance, democratic values, and constitutional order were sacrosanct and must be protected. He also stated that critical institutions and precepts like the judiciary and the rule of law must be respected and observed for the sustenance of democracy. Good sound bites there, great positioning. I mean, to be honest, I believe the president always says the right things in terms of when he meets with foreign, when he goes for his diplomatic trips or when he's receiving foreign delegates. Your take on this story with regards to the visit?
Well, the sad reality is doing the right thing is different from saying the right thing. That's the sad reality. As regards this, good optics, like you said, Nigeria and Senegal shares a very long historical line. We are both members of the ECOWAS, although Nigeria puts down about over 60% of the funds in ECOWAS. Nigeria is pretty much ECOWAS. We have the largest population and all of that. Senegal is brimming with a lot of hope. They have their own challenges with the economy, unemployment, and all of that. Bassirou Diomaye Faye is looking beyond and saying, okay, on the regional front, we need to be able to tap into the rich experience of President Tinubu as we stabilize ECOWAS. We know there are some errant members in ECOWAS. We've talked about Niger and the likes. And it's this fight of ideology trying to break away from France. And most of these countries have tilted, but the scary part is they've pivoted towards Russia. And Tinubu is saying, how can we bring all of these people into the flock? Yes, Bassirou Diomaye Faye too, during his campaign, had that narrative of trying to get France out of the way. In fact, at some point, he said he was going to get out of the CFA union. I don't know how easy or difficult that will be for him, but I think it's going to be very difficult because he will just crash the monetary system of Senegal. They also talked about a lot of other things as regards trade, banditry, insecurity. Across this West Africa coast, there's been a lot of insecurity. And most of the countries have had their fair share across the coast, from Guinea to even, parts of Mali and all of that. So how can we solve all of this, Also possibilities as regards trade, along the coast, fisheries and things like that. And many potential, But I think the thrust of the conversation should be intra-African trade and even intra-ECOWAS trade, which is very, very small at a time like this. Nigeria pretty much does most of the volumes, but how can we get other countries in? And I think that's pretty much the thrust of the conversation.
All right.
Okay, look, at the heart of diplomacy is what is called reciprocity. When people do good to you, you reciprocate. When they follow your hand, you also try to balance it up. Now, what has happened here is President Bassirou Faye of Senegal on a thank you visit, more or less, to President Tinubu. President Tinubu attended his inauguration on April 2, traveled all the way to Dakar, Senegal to attend it. And they met, took photographs. So shortly after, you now have President Faye, visiting President Tinubu, not just to thank him for coming to his inauguration, but also because he's ECOWAS chairman. At the moment, Faye is the youngest, member of that ECOWAS authority of heads of states and governments, and he's going to, at the next meeting, he's going to, formally appear there. So it makes sense that he comes also to see the chairman ECOWAS, who is president of Nigeria, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And in the course of the discussions, just diplomatic niceties, President Tinubu calling on him to support the process of fighting banditry, human trafficking, and crises within the West African region. That looks like a no-brainer, the right thing to say. And for him to also join, other West African leaders to stem the tide of military interventions in West Africa. We have military rule in Burkina Faso, we have in Mali, we have in Niger. Chad, only yesterday, just concluded its transition to a democratic process, even if it's the military ruler, transforming into a civilian president. And then, of course, President Tinubu talked about democratic governance, constitutional rule, the rule of law, law and order, and all of that. These are basic diplomatic things that you say, when two leaders are meeting. Now, Faye, in responding, of course, merely reiterated the same things that the president said and promised that, he too would be part of the process of promoting the constitutional governance within the ambit of the ECOWAS, authority of heads and states, authority of heads of states and governments that President Tinubu was talking about. So nothing has shaken there. The only major takeaway is President Tinubu saying that the two countries are brotherly countries. In other words, reiterating the fact that there's friendly relationship between Nigeria and Senegal. And he then said, Nigeria on its part, collaborating with Senegal, will try to revive the Nigeria-Senegal Joint Commission. And I think that that platform of the Joint Commission, provides opportunities for very strong bilateral exchanges. But Nigeria has these Joint Commission agreements with so many countries. But do we have the capacity to always follow up at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which has the direct responsibility of making sure that we follow up? So I hope this will not end, the promise made by President Tinubu, at the level of just making a statement, and that Nigeria, will collaborate, will work with the Senegalese authorities to see how we can strengthen those areas in which we can have a lot of partnership.
Well, very quickly, just to say that some similarities that Nigeria shares with Senegal, especially with regards to democracy, we must say that on the West African bloc, both countries have enjoyed at least somewhat what would be called stable democracy, at least for Nigeria since 1999. We turned from military rule to civilian rule, and in Senegal, which was almost toppled in terms of the strength of its democracy, not toppled, but marred earlier this year when former President Macky Sall wanted to unconstitutionally postpone the election. But the Senegalese people stood firm, and the constitutional courts decided that it must take place as it was meant to be scheduled, and then emerged the president, the youngest, at least for in this period, for Senegal. If you look at them standing side by side, it's also very reflective of the future and the present, or the past and the future of African rulership or African leadership. And I'll say that because President Tinubu is more advanced in age, and he's there to welcome a much younger Senegalese president in President Faye. And talking about even the fact that Nigeria, being a youthful population, would receive, so President Faye was in good hands, or good country, in good stead, as it was in a country with a youthful population, speaking to the strengths and the fact that very shortly on the African continent, we might see more young people emerge as leaders. Hopefully, this is a sign for that. But like has been mentioned, the right thing said, upholding democracy, and hopefully Nigeria and Senegal will continue to be the bastion of sustainable, solid democracy on the West African bloc and across the African continent as well.